Hey there and welcome. I'm Joshua and this is the RV Entrepreneur Podcast. The RV Entrepreneur is a community for RVers that are exploring ways to financially support themselves while living their RV life. And today we have the pleasure of talking with Marianne Eaves. Marianne is a bourbon master distiller that has taken her love of science and art and blended them, literally, in various ways throughout the spirits industry. She is currently full-time RVing with her family as they go from venue to venue with their other business, the Vernardo Circus, and Marianne has found a way to stay involved with the bourbon industry while traveling full-time, and her endeavors turned out pretty fantastic. But I'll let Marianne give you those tasty details. Marianne, welcome to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today. You've got a really cool business that you've taken on the road, and I'm super excited to dive into it. Give me an elevator pitch. Who is Marianne, and what are you doing?
My background is in chemical engineering. I got into the spirits industry as a college student, had no idea that that's what I wanted to do. I thought maybe renewable energy as a chemical engineer, but then just got to thinking of all the things you could make with corn. Why in the world would you make fuel when you could make bourbon? And I pursued that. I just fell in love with it. And I worked for a very large spirits corporation based out of Louisville, Kentucky for the beginning of my career. That's where I cut my teeth, learned everything about quality and process and all that great stuff through my job at Brown-Forman as their master taster and a process research and development engineer. And from there, I moved on to a startup distillery, which is a little bit misleading because it was the most beautiful, historic bourbon icon that was falling to pieces in Frankfort, Kentucky, called Castle and Key now. Once was the Old Taylor Distillery. E.H. Taylor has a really interesting history, but that moving on in the elevator pitch, I met Kevin, who is my partner, back in October of 2018 in Lexington, Kentucky. He came out to see the distillery where I was working, and I happened to also see the show that he was putting on as he was traveling through Lexington at that time. An interesting thing, I had already been thinking about ways to have a greater impact on the bourbon industry. So he swept through town right at the right time. And so essentially I just started visiting Kevin wherever he happened to be across the country, because he was already living the life of an RV entrepreneur running a circus show across the United States. So I got to see a lot of places that I really wouldn't have had a reason to otherwise, and really discovered there's an amazing opportunity for someone like me outside of Kentucky, and decided to make the jump. So I moved in with Kevin. We started having babies. We have 2 girls now. And I operate a mobile business. I'm a spirits consultant and have a mobile bourbon blending laboratory that travels along with us with the show.
Super cool. To connect the dots for everybody, Marianne and Kevin run Vernardo's Circus, which we had Edu on previously. And so that's how I actually got connected with them. Is Edu's like, man, boss lady, she's got some great bourbon. You need to get her on the line and talk about her traveling bourbon business. So that's what we're doing. When you and Kevin started having a relationship, was it at that point that you're like, okay, I really need to figure out a way to take my passion for bourbon on the road? Or had you already started to come up with ideas of how you could make this and get out of Kentucky?
I had a fascination already with the tiny home lifestyle. I was always watching those kind of series on HGTV and whatnot. I had already been kind of toying with it, but I think it really was all these experiences that I had as I was getting to know Kevin and chasing him across the country, meeting all these amazing craft distillers and seeing that bourbon is being made across the US, and there's opportunity there for someone with my skill set to maybe help people with process improvement or new product development or new expressions, or figuring out how to scale and grow and become more consistent, those types of things. So I had this original kind of fantasy of a converted Airstream that would be my laboratory, pulled by a Sprinter van, living the van life.
Mm-hmm.
And it just evolved. And now I've got this 28-foot box truck that I operate out of, and it's wonderful.
So tell me about the business. What is it from a consumer standpoint?
So the original inspiration behind the mobile laboratory was to have a workspace where I would be kind of pushed to continue to create and innovate while we're on the road. Trying to work out of our home, which is a Momentum toy hauler with two babies and Kevin and all of our other things, is really difficult because my job requires lots of bourbon to be out on counter spaces, and our table was
Hmm.
always covered, the kitchen counters were always covered, boxes of booze in the back of the house. So it varies what I am actually doing from project to project with these different clients that I have. But also, I have my own project called Eaves Blind, which was the main kind of inspiration behind the box truck construction, having this, space to roll around with us across the country, meeting these distillers, potentially rolling up onto their distillery property, making the blend in the laboratory, and having them as a part of the program. So Eve's Blind is a blind bourbon education and tasting palate development membership program. So
Hmm.
in the first year, it launched at the end of 2020. In the first year, it was 4 releases, 8 partner distilleries from across the US. Folks didn't know who the distilleries were, and I was actually intentionally withholding that information because I didn't include any bourbon from Kentucky. I wanted to show people
Interesting.
how what I felt as I was rolling around, like this bourbon made from all 4 corners and everywhere in between is really fantastic. Put a little bit of my own touch on it with the exclusive blends, single source blends, but present them blind. And then at the end of 2021, I revealed the names of the distilleries, and that there was no Kentucky bourbon involved, with the hope that the future we will start to talk about bourbon production in the US more than just Kentucky and everybody else. It would be more in terms of region, like they do in Scotland.
You opened up the membership and you had people sign up. Then you ended up getting different bourbon samples from these various distilleries. Some you sent out straight and some you blended. And then at the end of the year released what each of the bottles were. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I revealed the name of the distilleries, and then also another kind of surprise for folks who were members is that they had the opportunity now to buy a 750 bottle of each one of the blends. So there have been lots of folks who weren't able to take part in the membership program that have purchased the blends after the fact, and now excited to potentially be involved in the next go around in 2023.
What goes into creating a bourbon blend?
It's a lot of drinking. It's a lot of sitting down with booze, writing tasting notes. So, each one of these blends has anywhere between 9 and 25 barrels in it. There are mostly partial barrels. So, I'll sit down with individual barrel samples that the distillery has sent me and just start tasting them, writing notes, and then in my mind start to visualize what the experience of the bourbon could be with the real flavors that are present. It can be difficult, maybe you have an experience with a product already. Like, I know what Treaty Oak tastes like, so maybe I think that I want to create something that's more sweet or a little round or a longer finish, and just being able to have some real product that I know that is going to provide that experience. Something that I talk about a lot and that I focus on a lot is creating a long finish, complex profile. It's balanced, nuanced. I focus maybe even more so on the experience and the feeling than just the individual flavor notes.
When a distillery sends you a sample, how much volume are we talking there?
Oh, it's like 200 mLs,
Okay.
200
And
milliliters.
then when you're blending something up to taste with a new blend, approximately how much you pour in for yourself to taste? Just enough for a few sips?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's like 20 milliliters or less. It's definitely less than a shot. So I'm just
Yeah.
tasting a little bit, writing the notes, and then I'll go back and start adding them, layering the barrels in. I might hit a spot where I'm like, all right, this 5 barrels is perfect, but I might try and add one more to see what it does. If it goes one way, we'll keep it. If not, then we'll try again or just leave it as it is. I've been really particular with the partner distilleries that I chose for Eve's Blind, for one, but also in my consulting business, the clients that I work with and create blends for really have all of their trust in me. They send me their product samples of stuff that they own already, or I'm helping them find good bourbon, and I send them a sample of what I think is the best product that we can make with the barrels that they have. And usually I haven't had one yet that came back and was like, no, we got to start over.
Hmm.
Usually they really like it. One of those brands is called Sweetens Cove. It's a Tennessee based golf course, actually, that has this really cool tradition of taking a shot of bourbon before the first tee. And what had been happening is folks were just bringing bottles of bourbon and leaving them there for whoever came next to try. And they
Uh-huh.
thought, well, we've got this cool thing, ritual that happens already here. Why don't we make our own? And so
Yeah.
it was really fun to use initially product that they purchased to create some unique blends. And now, as I'm more incorporated into the team, to actually select unique batches of bourbon and come up with the blends kind of from the base.
Mail is a hard thing for RVers in general. Talk to me about mail with spirits and alcohol.
Yeah, so shipping alcohol is complicated. Luckily, in almost everywhere that we go, we're either like literally parked at a place that I can receive bourbon, they
Mhm.
have the licenses, or I have friends, distilleries in town that allow me to ship the product to them, and then I just go pick it up. But yeah, it can be complicated because my clients will reach out and be like, hey, I've got this sample for you, it's happening right now, and I'm like, all right, well, here's where I am until Sunday. If you can't get it here
Right.
before Sunday, this is where it goes next.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a juggling game for
Hmm.
sure.
Yes.
How much of your chemistry degree are you using in your current business?
As a blender, not a ton of science. It's more, I think it's more artistic the way that I do it. There is
Okay.
some math that goes into it, but because I'm making these very small batch limited blends, it's not something that I'm trying to create this consistent profile across lots and years and 40,000 barrel warehouse inventories and things like that, which can be very complex. What I do is on a much smaller, much more hand blended scale. As a chemical engineer, I love the product and process improvement. I've had the opportunity to work with a handful of distilleries, helping them review their processes, talk about adding new equipment. I actually have an overseas client that I'm going to be supporting through their distillery startup via Zoom, just because travel to that location is not possible right now. So definitely using my chemical engineering background in those types of projects.
You're traveling with a box truck that's got various amounts of bourbon and alcohol, and you're crossing
Mhm.
state lines. Were there any roadblocks that you had to? I mean, I'm sure there are roadblocks. How do you handle that? You're moving around with a circus. You're going to various states throughout the country. You're visiting multiple distilleries. People are sending you stuff. Talk to me about some of the hardships of running a spirits business on the road.
Well, it's a mobile laboratory. So the stuff that I make in here and what I'm doing in the laboratory is not going for sale. So I'm creating the
Okay.
recipes, but physically what I am mixing together in the box truck is not going to be sold. So that's how I get around most of the challenges. Originally, my fantasy was a mobile like distillery where I would be able to create new recipes for clients and actually do the mashing and distillation here in the box truck. But that, I can't get permits in all of the states that I would need to economically. My business is registered in Kentucky because I have a home there. It all makes sense, kind of ties back to that state. But yeah, so the boxes of booze are more experimental and personal.
When you decided to launch this, you obviously had your hand in the bourbon industry to begin with. But talk to me about marketing. What did you choose to do? What worked? What didn't work?
The marketing has been interesting. When I first got into the industry, I was working for this huge spirits corporation, and they have their own marketing teams for every one of the brands that they own, huge PR division, their in-house media training. So very early on, I feel I had a good understanding of marketing in the spirit space, how to get the word out about your product, what people are interested in knowing. As a master taster, they would often put me in front of enthusiast groups that would kind of, just rip you apart. They want to know all the details of everything, which is very different from just being in like a bourbon dinner tasting or something like that. So, and as a chemical engineer, I had all those details. I was very passionate about the pH of the fermenter and the yeast strains that we were using and the distillation proof and, exactly how long the oak had been seasoned before our barrels were produced at the cooperage and that sort of thing. The marketing has been a challenge for Eaves Blind a little bit, just because there's so many stories to tell. So I've got 8 distilleries that all came together to support this mission of elevating bourbon as our nation's spirit. And how do we all play together to, the rising tide raises all boats. And I think that it's worked because nobody has done anything like Eaves Blind before. It's just a matter of trying to condense all of the stories to tell in something that's compelling and that folks can buy into and that actually they want to put their money behind. So that may be my biggest challenge with Eaves Blind. Across the board, like my brand and marketing with some of the folks that I work with, I'll be honest with you, the circus, some people get it. Some people get it and some people don't get it. And the people that don't get it, I know, and Kevin and I talk about this all the time. There are probably thousands of people out there that love you that you haven't even met yet, that are already on your team. And then there are folks that aren't and will never be. And we just have to try and separate the maybe disappointment for folks that are like, oh, you're a carny now? No, I'm still a master distiller. I just happen to live this amazing, magical, nomadic life that rolls around the country and provides so many more opportunities to what I love to do. I haven't deserted this accomplishment that I had being Kentucky's first female master distiller. I'm trying to continue to enrich myself and bourbon as a whole. So thinking about that as well, trying to marry these two seemingly different worlds. I don't think they're all that different, actually. It's art, it's passion, and as we know now, it's national.
Yeah. And congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment, being the first female master distiller.
Oh, thank you very much.
When you reached out for Eaves Blind to these 8 distilleries, how did you word that pitch? Because you're saying basically, hey, I want you to send me some bourbon. I'm going to blend it. We're going to send this out. But no one's going to know your name until the end.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine that's a leap of faith from their end of being like, yeah, this could be really good and it could be a total waste of our time.
Yeah. I think most of the folks that I spoke to in year 1 already knew me and I had a relationship with. There were a couple that I felt were kind of cold calls, but got them on board pretty quickly. Like Journeyman was not a distillery that I knew of, but I had heard their product was pretty good, and it turns out it's very good. I had a lot of fun working with their barrels to create this blend. 291 Distillery in Colorado, I had met Michael a couple of times, but it had been years and years since we had spoken. And I, again, just picked up the phone and said, hey, I don't know if you know who I am, but, we did a couple events together, and this is this harebrained idea that I've come up with. I would love for you guys to be a part of it. And they said, where do we sign? And that happened a few times. Stumpy's was another one. I called and I said, I'm trying to put together this roster. I just wanted to see if you guys might be interested. If it's not this year, maybe it's next time. And they were like, yes, we would love to be a part of it. If it has to be next year, we'll wait, but we want to do it. So it was just, It was just wonderful. And Oregon Spirit Distillery, there in Bend, Oregon, I was actually living there in Redmond. So this was during the pandemic, Kevin's operation essentially got waylaid. We were doing digital shows. He was streaming circus performances from the parking lot there at the Deschutes County Fairground. We had our house, a couple of our core team were there living with us, and then we would have Kevin would have artists come in once a month about to do some kind of either corporate buyout virtual show or just their kind of monthly live stream show for circus fans. So I was there and I was like, no, what am I going to do with my time? Maybe I'll start this mobile laboratory construction. And at first I was reaching out, and I probably should have said this before. I was trying to find an easier way to go about it. So I was trying to find like partnerships. I contacted this company that makes some cocktail apparatuses and small barrels for like aging your own cocktails at home and that sort of thing. And I pitched them the idea because they had actually reached out to me about a sponsorship. And I was like, well, if you want a sponsorship, I got something for you. And they were like, whoa, too much. My next I thought was like, well, I have friends and I think I can do this. So I just started hanging out with Brad, the owner of Oregon Spirit Distillers, and Brandy, the distiller there. And I asked him, I was like, I think I want to do this thing. I know it sounds crazy, but what do you guys think? Is it possible? Can it work? Can I get other craft distilleries excited about this? And they were stoked about it. We ran some of the numbers. It's more about storytelling and the marketing and visibility for them, and truly having the endorsement of Kentucky's first female master distiller, a Kentucky master distiller, saying this Oregon bourbon is something that you guys should be paying attention to.
Right.
And literally with my name and creating a product with them endorsing the juice itself. So it's been really fun. And yeah, like I said, all of them really got behind it. And it was an interesting process. It evolved as it went along. I kind of changed some things as it progressed, and most of them were very fluid and excited about the small tweaks that I made in that first go round. A big learning, but I think really impactful for all these guys.
Your box truck, is it branded? Is there Marianne's face going down the highway? Or is it pretty covert and no one knows what's inside?
So it was the Circus Box Truck. So Kevin had his logo plastered across the side of it, and he was trying to sell it right at the beginning of the pandemic. So they went ahead and just painted over it. They painted it white. I often wish that it still had that circus logo on the side of it, because then it would be even more. I sometimes jokingly refer to it as the Vernardo's After Hours Speakeasy. So it's pretty covert.
Have you ever done any live events? You're traveling with your family. Having events at different distilleries throughout the nation could be pretty fun and pretty lucrative for you. Has that ever been on your radar?
Yeah, there's a couple coming up actually. So there's a Oregon Spirit Distilleries actually is going to be Spirit Distillers is going to be the first one that I roll up with the mobile laboratory and do an event with. I've been still tweaking a few things on the inside, but now I feel like it's really ready to do some events and have a few. It's not huge. I can fit maybe 10 people in here seated comfortably, do a presentation, hang out. We were also thinking of maybe just doing some tours, have people come in and see where the magic happens. And yeah, there's also in Colorado, the circus venue in Colorado Springs, FH Beer Works. They just opened a whiskey bar called Neat Whiskey House. And so I'm actually going to be doing a presentation with the Eaves Blind series at the Whiskey House, and we're going to do a similar thing. So a little VIP reception after the event with the owners of the bar and myself. So I would love to find more opportunities to do that kind of thing as we roll along, to partner with bars or friends that have distilleries and either create something new for them to present through the laboratory, or just some kind of meet and greet and chat and taste some fun stuff.
A private presentation in the box truck. Give me a ballpark. What is something like that? If I wanted to attend, what would I guesstimate to pay?
I don't know if we have a ticket price yet. I think it's going to be, I don't know, 100, something like that. Maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's a good ballpark, because I was like, is it $75? Is it $500? That's good frame of reference.
I don't think $500. Maybe I'll do like a, well, I was thinking, so I did a VIP blending class at the Texas Distillery at Treaty Oak, one of the partners in the first round of Eve's Blind, and we charged $300 for that. So I could do something like that in the box truck as well, like a little blending class. The only
Okay.
thing with that is I would have to be on the premises of a bonded facility. I had to make sure, everything was covered legally to do something like that, but that would be a lot of fun.
Is there any crossover between the circus and the bourbon?
So when I first moved in with Kevin, actually in September of 2019, I made a little bar for the circus. I had this crazy vision in my mind. I was like, all right, we're going to hire some flair bartenders. We're going to have a flaming cocktail. It's going to be in this little secret tent. It's almost like you're walking into one of those, like, what do you want to, like, at a carnival or like, pay to see the world's hairiest woman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and then you peek behind the curtain and there's something magical back there. That's what I was thinking kind of for the bar. I'm like, this is a family show, but we could have this little adult only area where the bar is, have these crazy cocktails, one that has like a smoking bubble on top of it. And I had something very elevated in my mind. What we wound up with, because of the time frame that we had to execute and all of the crazy permits that are required. I mean, talk about permits, the circus moving place to place, it's just nuts. But add an alcohol permit on top of that and it's just even a little crazier. So we ended up going to a caterer that already had all the licenses. They were able to get the event license pushed through quickly, so we went with them, and his bartenders were not up to the task of this crazy vision that I had in my mind, but we came up with some cute cocktails. My favorite, and I think one that will be revived in a little more elevated way in the future, is called the Strong Manhattan. Okay. So a bourbon drink, a little riff on the strong man, but we're also an elegant bourbon cocktail. So yeah, in the future, I can see more of a collaboration happening, but so far our worlds have been pretty separate.
As a bourbon connoisseur, do you drink anything other than bourbon? Or is bourbon work you drink elsewhere on your happy hour time?
I've heard interesting anecdotes about this before. When people work in a certain spirit or beverage category, they don't want anything to do with it when they're not on the clock. I don't know that that's the case for me. When I go out, for a dinner or drinks, I love trying bourbon cocktails. I want to taste these unique flavors that the bartender created. So typically I'm looking at the cocktail menu first. Not often am I drinking neat bourbon unless I'm with a work group, honestly. Sometimes I'll sit down with Kevin and be like, hey, have you tried this thing yet? I've created this blend. I'd love for you to try it. Let's just sit down and drink a little together. I also love gin. I created a gin while I was working at Castle and Key, and I'm dying for a reason to get back in and make another gin. And mezcal would be probably my third spirit love. I also drink a lot of beer. A lot sounds maybe. I drink beer often, probably more often. At the end of the day, I'm reaching for a beer than whiskey and red wine. I like red wine too. There's a really lovely winery in Napa called Hoops. I actually work with her on a spirit project. So we're trying to use the fire affected grapes to create the world's first smoked brandy.
Interesting.
We're trying to create a new category, and it's not been easy, but it's going to be totally worth it. But her Cabernet is the best I've ever had. Hoops Vineyard. And there's some other really beautiful wineries out there that I've become accustomed or acquainted with, I should say.
Yeah. Does Kevin enjoy bourbon?
He does. And he drank a lot of gin when we first got together too. I would essentially go see him in one of these places and bring a case of gin with me, and we'd drink gin and cocktails because my bourbon that I was making at that distillery hadn't come of age yet. But now that I've got all these different projects and I've got bourbon samples around the house constantly, he doesn't complain about it. We'll say that.
Do you have a favorite bourbon that you've blended?
Ooh, a favorite bourbon that I blended. So going back, rewinding the clock a little bit to when I was working at Brown-Forman right out of college, as they trained me to become the master taster and protege to Chris Morris, the master distiller of Woodford Reserve. Chris had this idea for a new product line called the Whiskey Row series. And it would be, I think it wound up being 4, maybe 5 releases of, historic styles, traditional styles, historic styles of whiskey. And he gave me essentially the reins on the first one. So he came up with the concept and he said, all right, Marianne, go make it. So I had full access to 6 or 7 enormous bourbon warehouses on Brown-Forman's campus, picking out barrels to create this 1870 Old Forester product. And I thought that the first release of that, what you pick up on the shelf now is whatever they have since developed as their process of picking out the product. But I really spent a lot of effort on that first go round, and something that I was really proud about when I presented it to the brand team, the kind of the director of marketing for Old Forester. She tasted it and she said, Marianne, this is better than the Old Forester birthday bourbon, which is an annual 12-year-old release that they do. She's like, I don't know how you did it, but I like this more than birthday bourbon. And it was a significantly less premium release. Maybe I shouldn't say significantly. It was definitely a notch down the ladder of what they thought they were going to price it at. But I think maybe she was changing her mind a little bit after she tasted what I was able to create for them. But that very first release of the Old Forester 1870 is probably my proudest blending moment. But I've got to say, I think I'm just getting better and better at it with the 8 bottles that I did for Eve's Blind. I really don't think there's a bad egg among them. I just had a new product that's a blend of Kentucky bourbon and Tennessee bourbon under the Sweetens Cove label. It's called Tennessee. That one I think is really nice too. It's more accessible than the initial 2 Sweetens Cove launches, about $60 a bottle instead of $200. But yeah, I'm just having more fun all the time.
I should have asked this towards the beginning. Is it just you working on all this, or do you have anybody helping you?
I've tried a couple times to get like virtual assistants, but I'm not very good at delegating. So it just ends up being another thing on my plate to try and figure out what am I going to get this person to work on. I do have a fantastic design partner, which I definitely know that the Eve's Blind program would not have been as successful without Dale Doyle and the holotype team up there in Cincinnati, Ohio. They have been so supportive, and just the excellence that they have created it's just inspiring to me and been really wonderful. Like even with the design of the box truck, how the inside is laid out, the color scheme, Dale with holotype connected me to the designer that put most of it together. So yeah, It's been vital. And I have a great PR guy. I should say that too. That is also very important in this industry.
So walk me through, what does a typical work week look like for you?
It changes, from week to week. And another thing about my life, I'm a mother of 2 young girls. I've got a almost 2.5-year-old and an almost 1-year-old, and they really keep me busy. So my work schedule ebbs and flows, and luckily my clients understand that. As long as we're meeting our deadlines and you're creating these award-winning products for us, we're not gonna worry too much about that 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, whatever it is. So I'm just really, really fortunate that I have the flexibility to kind of juggle my entrepreneur life and my mom life.
Has that been difficult, juggling the circus, the bourbon, the family?
Yeah, it's a whole new world, and there have been challenges for sure. What I'm so grateful for is that we found we call her our nomadic adventure nanny. So Ayana, we found while we were in Longmont, Colorado. So the circus was in Longmont. There's a local guy named Will Mans who is a magician. He stopped by the tent to talk to Kevin, ask him if there were any opportunities. I was doing a bottling for the Eve's Blind program and needed some help with filling bottles and putting bottles in boxes and that sort of thing. So he was genuinely looking for an opportunity, and I got him engaged with me in that. So we had some long drives together, driving from Longmont down to Colorado Springs and talking about life. And I told him, we were really hoping to find a nanny to come with us when we left Colorado. And he said, "You want a nanny? I know who it is. I know who you need." And Ayana has been so wonderful. Unfortunately, she's moving on to new horizons in July. So I was actually thinking maybe the RV Entrepreneur Network might be a good place to find another road nanny for the Vernardo circus. But her partner actually travels with us. So it's Andy and Ayana. Andy is a chef and wrote a cookbook called The Bus Life Kitchen. So he's also an RV entrepreneur. And then Ayana is working for us in the circus. It's really wonderful. I love that we get to create opportunities like that in our partnership, and Kevin and I also.
Very cool. That's cool how the connections just seem to, looking back, the dots connect themselves.
Oh, yeah.
I would, yeah, if you want to jump into the RV Entrepreneur Group and list that out, there may definitely be somebody who's either on the road or looking to get on the road that might enjoy jumping on with you guys. And anybody, if you're listening, go ahead and reach out to Marianne. We'll make sure you get her contact information out there at the end of the show. Going forward, excuse my pun, but you guys have got a lot of balls in the air. You're juggling a lot of things. What does success look like for you and the spirits business going forward?
Yeah, but I've been talking about that a lot recently, and I've got this big dream. I want to get back into a distillery of my own someday, but what exactly does that look like? And Kevin, he is the producer and ringmaster, so he's actually on the stage singing and dancing every show all the time. That's probably not going to last forever. And as the girls get older and close to school age, are we going to want to have a little bit more stability? Is homeschooling something that we want to do? I still see, because even before joining the circus, I had a pretty nomadic upbringing. My mom essentially moved us to a new house every year as I was growing up. You would think, is she a real estate agent? Is she like an investor? No, mom she loved real estate. I think that was part of it, but she was just like, I want to move to the city. I want to move to the country, back and forth, back and forth. So I think that that's probably going to be a part of my DNA forever. I know that Kevin, moving every 2 weeks for the past 2 decades of his life, it would be hard for him to stay in one place for any length of time. Like even a couple months seems like he's itching, crawling out of his skin. So we'll just see how our family evolves. I could see having a distillery and maybe Vernardo circus event venues across the US that we hop between at certain points of the year. Kevin's already invested in a piece of property down in Hastings, Florida, which is very close to St. Augustine, which is actually where another one of my partner distilleries is located because of that connection with the circus, actually. And that's going to be hopefully developed into an event venue, the circus winter quarters. So we'll just see what lies ahead for the growth of Eaves Blind and how that connects with the Eaves empire, and how that might support our family goals as well.
Well, if someone's interested in connecting with you, Marianne, where can they go to do that?
I'm active on social media, Instagram, Marianne BMD, or Eaves Blind, EAVESBLIND, not Eaves Blinds. I'm not making window coverings. Or, you could just email me directly, info@ Marianne Eaves or Marianne@ EavesBlind.com. I would love to chat with folks.
Awesome. Thank you, Marianne, for taking the time. This is a super cool way that you've blended something that is very much rooted in history of being a stationary thing, and you're taking it on the road. And I think it's really awesome. And you're blending your passion with your family and your family's passion. And I think it's a really cool story of there's no no's. There's always a way to get to do what you want. You just got to come up with a creative solution.
That's right. Yeah, I like to say one of my least favorite things that folks will say sometimes is it's impossible. Nothing is impossible.
Agreed. Well, thank you again for taking the time out of your day to join us and being on the RV Entrepreneur Podcast.
Thank you so much, Joshua. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Marianne. Pretty cool lady. And it's very cool. At the end, she said there are no impossibilities. Something like bourbon distilling, usually done in a singular place. And although she's not distilling, she's experimenting and blending. She found a way to take her passion of spirits and figure out how to do it on the road. Something that she's probably one of a handful of spirit industry folk who are on the road and still involved in the industry. So I think that's pretty cool. If you're interested in checking out her Eaves Wine program, I'll put that link in the show notes. You can go check out the website and maybe get on for the 2023 version of that program. And also all the rest of her contact information I will include in the show notes as well. If you're interested in being an adventure road nanny, go jump onto the RVE community on Facebook. I know Marianne was active in there posting a wanted ad for an adventure nanny to come with them on the road and help out with the nannying of the Vernardo Circus group. And we'd love to connect you on all the social medias. You can go to therventrepreneur.com/connect to find links to all those as well. And if you think you'd be a good guest for the show, fill out the guest form, therventrepreneur.com/guest form. And with that, I'll see you down the road and on the next episode.